911, what are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal, or?
I can't tell. All I know is that my central light came on, and I just happened to glimpse and see this thing running across the yard. A good-sized man, or something. It looks like a man. I don't know what it was, just that it ran across the yard.
Okay. You've had problems in the neighborhood before?
Yeah, my dog was killed here just recently. I don't know what it was. Whatever it is, it's running. I couldn't catch it if I was going to chase it, but whatever it was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now, and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
Dio!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh. Okay, hang on.
He's right...
Is he in your yard, sir?
Yeah, God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
Oh, and the guy is on foot.
I don't know what... It's a big... real big person. That's all I can say.
Okay, but it is a person.
Yeah, I'd say it was a person, somebody really big. But he's all in black.
Is he a black male or a white male? Did you actually see whether, or was he just wearing black?
He's all black and he's big. He is big.
This is the Book Laws Crew. Okay, folks, I think we got a great show for you tonight. We've got a very interesting chap as our guest, and we've been looking forward to talking to him for quite a while now. His name is Steve, and he's a software engineer, but there's much more to him than that. He's a person whose outlook on the world is deeply steeped in the scientific methods of the acquiring and evaluation of facts. And you'll learn what I mean by that later on as the show goes on. And, you know, it's also with the use of these methods that he explores the talking points of the Sasquatch world, not just as an enthusiast or a researcher, but as a seeker of the truth by following in whatever direction those truths may lead. That's my definition of a true seeker anyway. What's more about this gentleman, he has the singular gift of being able to express his findings in an elegant and concise manner. No pressure, Steve. May I introduce to you, the Book Laws Crew listeners, to Steve the Curious Cryptid. Welcome aboard, Steve. It's good to have you.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Excellent. I've never really met you before. Now, I've seen you on other programs in the past, different podcasts, but I think I was only on one at the same time you were, and that was Pat's Squatch Talk show. That was many months ago. But I've been wanting to meet you, and yeah, this is absolutely fabulous. Now, I know the subject of Sasquatch is a vast subject, so where does one jump in on this? I was thinking maybe we could start off with a lesson on skepticism, which I don't think there's enough of in this world. For example, I know from watching your videos that you have been to the Bigfoot tree. Now, the Bigfoot tree, what can be some basic lessons that we can learn from that mystery? I know Brent went into great detail about his research in the past on the Bigfoot tree, but I also know you were there somewhat recently with Brent, I believe, and you videoed the Bigfoot tree. Could you tell us a little bit about the Bigfoot tree and what lessons might be learned from the study of such a thing?
Well, sure. From a forestry standpoint and geological standpoint, I think it's one of the most interesting trees probably on the planet. it's growing on an old riverbed, glacial riverbed, and it's got a lot of large stones in the ground around where it grows, and its roots are entwined into that. And when the wind blows, it shifts and moves, and you hear thumping and grinding and all sorts of noises. And if you had a light object like a tennis ball on the ground around the base of that tree, sometimes when it's going, those balls will actually start bouncing around on the ground, so much from it. There is a little bit of question as to exactly where the sounds come from and exactly how they're generated, and it's probably more than one mechanism involved. Brent described a branch about 60 feet up in the tree that is grown from one side of the tree into the other. It's a forked tree, so it's a tuning fork sort of tree. And he's fairly convinced that most of the thumping sounds are coming from that sliding back and forth. And I've got to agree, at least some probably do. But when I was sitting there for 5 or 6 hours one day listening to what's going on around there, I found at least 2 other trees that do basically the same thing, and they don't have the tuning fork, and they don't have the branch stuck through them growing up higher up. So I'm thinking that a lot of the sounds come from underneath the ground. And I've got a test that I want to do to try to figure that out. Basically clipping microphones onto the tree, low down to the ground and high up, and looking at when a sound happens, looking at which microphones are getting triggered first. Is the sound coming from the top of the tree going down or the bottom of the tree going up?
Steve, could you just quickly review why this tree became a tree of interest in the first place?
Well, there's a story around it that I was introduced to the story by Brent. Mm-hmm. But the story surrounding the tree is there's a Bigfoot community myth that there's a Bigfoot living in a cave under the tree. Mm-hmm. And that's what the thumping is. And this was carried on for a while. Now, this is right next to a public campground. And the people apparently charged money for a Bigfoot gathering at this free public campground, and would bring them up to the Bigfoot tree to visit the big guy living under the tree. Now, the funny thing is, if it was too windy and the tree was thumping too much, possibly in fear of someone figuring out what was going on, the story would always be, "Oh, he's mad, he's angry at us, we better leave right now. Can't let people see what's going on for too long."
And where is this tree located, Steve?
It is, well, it's something that Brent didn't give to me until I was basically near there. It's in the hills up above Darrington. It's about an hour's drive from Darrington.
What
kind of Washington?
It's in Washington State. It's on the Cascade River.
Okay.
It's not a big secret because, I mean, in recent history, there's been a lot of people going there to see that tree. It's a well-known spot.
Yeah. I'm struggling to remember the name of the campground, actually. I can look it up here.
That's all right.
But you go into Marble Mount, and at Marble Mount, you turn south and go down along the Cascade River Google Maps is not showing me the road.
It's because it's cloaked with the UFO Sasquatch.
Yeah, you don't want to buck those guys.
Yeah, the Starfleet UFOs.
Cross-border Sasquatches. Ooh. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's a pretty well-known legend. I certainly hadn't heard of it, but I'd been out of the community for a very long time when that story started to evolve. And I'm just kind of respecting the fact that Brent was kind of handling it as a don't tell everyone where it is. A lot of people already know for sure.
Oh yeah.
Well, we'll keep the campground name confidential for now. Then, yeah, if he wants to keep it low key, yeah.
From what I understand about Brent's investigation into that tree, it's very well known. There's been hundreds of people to that tree, and before Brent even got there, before Brent discovered the tree. And I must be listening to
and my only concern about it is vandalism. You get too many. Just honestly, my experience is if people are what they leave behind, people are trash.
No, but I like I was saying, it's an amazing account because the sounds that come out of that tree are just unbelievable.
Yeah, I have not seen it on a really active day. I only got 5 or 6 thumps out of it for sitting there for about 5 hours waiting for the winds to pick up.
Even that was impressive.
Yeah.
Just those. I mean, boy, the first time I saw Brent's video on this tree, and if you go to his StreamYard site, or rather his YouTube site, my mistake, he has about a 2-hour video on the subject of that tree, how he came to find it and discover it and look into it. And it's very interesting. It's very interesting. That's one of the weirdest things I've ever seen is that tree. Yeah. But I mean, well, wouldn't skepticism serve you there, Steve? Because a lot of people believed that there was a Sasquatch living under that tree, making those noises and everything. A lot of people till this day probably believe there's a Sasquatch or Bigfoot under that tree. And it
absolutely. Brent spent hours looking for a cave. I wouldn't have bothered. I know enough about geology, looking at the terrain there and where it is. Ancient riverbeds are not a place you find caves. If a void is washed out or opened up in the ancient riverbed, it fills in with sand and gravel and collapses in on itself. So, but apart from that, why would you hear a Bigfoot if it was there under the ground? How would you hear it banging on something through the tree?
Well, people claim that it even carries on, I don't know whether it's Morse code or what it is, it even carries on a conversation with you. If you tap the tree the right way, it'll tap back.
Yes. And the voices in my head.
Yeah. What kind of tree is it, Steve? Is it a Douglas fir? Is it what is it?
I didn't look all that closely at the bark to identify the species. I would go with Douglas fir, actually, as I think about it.
Is it a big old growth tree or is it rather small?
It's a pretty big old growth tree. Each of the forked bases is around, probably at least about 40 inches across at chest height. It is a really substantial tree. There are at least one of the other trees that does the knocking sound in the breeze is cedar.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And your conclusions and Brent's conclusions now is the noises coming from this tree has nothing to do with the Sasquatch.
We're absolutely agreed. It's nothing to do with the Sasquatch. I think there are multiple mechanisms that create the sounds.
Yeah. It reminds me of my childhood. Back in behind my cousin's place in the bush there where we used to play, we have what we call the witch's tree. It's a tree that just moved, big maple that would move in the wind and make a cackling noise. Or sound something that sounded like a cackling noise.
I thought you were going to say you had a burning bush experience when you were a teenager.
No, that was a previous life.
That was a previous life. So, Steve, tell me, what caused you after leaving the world of Bigfoot, and what caused you to return to it again? And has it changed any?
Oh, it has changed a lot. When I left, Bigfoot was a traditional monster in the woods. Flesh and blood creature, mysterious unknown species of ape. All of the normal, regular stuff that I think you should probably expect.
Mm-hmm.
When I came back, as I say in one of my videos, Bigfoot done gone got psychic. It's been entwined into the New Age and metaphysical, spiritual, mystical communities and the UFO communities, and honestly, to my perception, it's all kind of just the same thing now. It's just a word substitution. You're talking about Bigfoot, or you're talking about UFOs, or you're talking about ascended masters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's been blended into one giant kind of homogenous religion.
You know, I don't mind the paranormal. As a matter of fact, I love a good ghost story as the next guy. But for some reason, I cannot associate the paranormal with Bigfoot or Sasquatch. I don't know why that is. Maybe I'm a holdout for a flesh and blood animal, 100%, just like a bear.
A zoological mystery, in other words, not a paranormal mystery. Steve basically said a fancy way of saying the inmates running the asylum.
Mm. Yeah.
I usually see the woo come into factors of unknown topics just for the sake it's unknown, and the people have become not capable of collecting correct, rational data. And so
it's a way of creating an explanation when you don't have an explanation.
Yeah.
But what brought me back was I was sitting on one of my vacation properties, which we had thinned, and the logger rather severely overcut some of the areas. And so I was there with my cell phone doing some video, just panning across and making notes to myself on how I wanted to deal with replanting and dealing with the fact that it was overcut. And while I was talking, I started to hear a sound that at first I thought was an echo of my own voice, but I realized I didn't recognize the language that was coming at me. And that kind of confused me for a moment, and I stopped and I looked at the path people would be coming up if one of my neighbors was coming onto the property to say hi, and no one was there. And by the time I looked around in the other direction, I didn't see anything there. But I had this sound. I couldn't quite make out the words, but I'd swear it sounded a bit like Inuit or maybe Salish. And so I just started looking at, language in the woods, voices in the woods sort of thing, and stumbled back upon the Sierra Sounds, which I had once known about a long time ago, and just set aside with everything else. And that kind of got me wondering if I had heard something like that. And that got me starting to look back into Bigfoot. Gee, I figured this would all be solved about 10 or 20 years ago now. And
didn't we all?
And, I'm glad I didn't hold my breath for that.
Must have been pretty disappointing. What were you thinking when you realized, as you just came back in and you kind of thought, there's like nothing, nothing's changed? Or
yeah, and the funny thing was, I stumbled upon the Ketchum study, bear in mind it was 2019. I had managed to miss all that foofra in the news. And so I saw, oh, a Bigfoot DNA study. Well, I haven't heard of it, so I wonder how far along it is. I wonder when they're going to publish their results. And found out very quickly that, to borrow a phrase from the movie Aliens, whatever happened here, it's over.
Nothing to see here, folks. Go home. Come on.
And but I kept running into these references where there were a few people who would keep referring back to the Sasquatch Genome Project as proof there was Bigfoot and as proof of the Nephilim. So now you know who I'm talking about. And I decided to try to figure out why. Well, what's really in the study? Because I understand it was panned pretty thoroughly, but I also understand that the press, ever since the psychic powers stuff back in the 70s, the press doesn't take anything strange and paranormalish very well at all. And I figured, okay, so maybe there's overreaction, and maybe there really is something in there. So I dug deeply down into it, reading all the way through it, trying to understand the chemistry, trying to understand all the things that went wrong. I drew upon some friends of mine. I'm a consulting software engineer with an EE background. I have friends who worked on the first Sanger sequencers. And so I asked them about the projects that they worked on, and they told me about the chemistry and the electronics. And I got to learn a lot about how that works. And I got to the point where I couldn't learn any more. I was running into pretty much dead ends. And I sent an email to Dr. Meldrum the Saturday before Christmas in 2019, or the Friday before Christmas. And Saturday morning, I woke up and I heard my phone blip, and I had an email from Meldrum.
Wow.
Saying, have a look at these papers. And that led me to Dr. Haskell Hart. And from Dr. Hart, I started to learn about how to access the DNA databases that are online from the National Institutes of Health, and how to do alignment studies, and reading through his blog and duplicating all of the work that he did to understand how to do that. That's one thing that science does. Someone's done this, so you look at what they did, you look at how they did it, and then you repeat it yourself to see that you get the same results. That's something that I have seen this many people in the Bigfoot world do. And it's so important, it's worth mentioning twice.
That's a lot.
That's a whole lot.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
That many? Holy smokes.
Have you ever had an encounter yourself, Steve, or possible encounter of some kind?
I believe so, on 2 occasions, maybe 3. 2 are in the Salton Basin area. They were very close to the same area. And the reason I say yes on one is I was sitting in a car. I'd gone out there to go stargazing. It was a new moon night. It was dark enough you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. The mosquitoes were awful. We had retreated back into the car. Our eyes were still adjusting to the dome light being on. There was a grunt. The back end of the car got pushed, and something brushed past the car, walked onto the road, and then I could hear it stomp down the road on 2 feet, deeper into the forest. Later that evening, and this was 1986, so no, I don't have any pictures on my cell phone because there weren't even cell phones then. And but I stopped for gas on the way home, and there was a handprint, humanish hand shaped kind of like this, but about the size of a dinner plate on the back fender of the car.
You know, I recall listening to one of your audio essays, and I think you were talking or making reference to survivors of past encounters, and you spoke about dreams, one or two dreams that you had, and you called them teaching dreams. I'm really curious about that.
Well, the idea of the teaching dream is something that I learned about in the 20 years that I wasn't looking for Bigfoot. I was still interested in strange and fringy stuff, and so I was looking at the spiritual and mystical communities, and and one of the ideas that they have in the framework of the kind of New Age spiritual belief system is having spirit guides, and your spirit guides will often teach you in the form of dreams. As Leon will point out, there's lots of psychological reasons behind why these things go on too, and brain chemistry and all of that. But if a dream is particularly meaningful to you and it brings you a level of insight in something that you may have not been aware of, and you take the time to investigate whether that insight is actually useful and rooted, at least in some part, in fact, it might be helpful.
Mm. Mm. Just your subconscious telling you what the heck is going on.
Normally, when you have deep, intense dreams, you've been learning something. It's not necessarily anything to do with what you're dreaming about,
Yeah.
but your brain is generating new neural pathways, and it's connecting things inside your brain. And what you're dreaming about are the things that are getting connected into the new things that you're learning.
I can understand that. Tell me something. Has anybody ever had a dream about Bigfoot or Sasquatch? That there was a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch in the dream?
Yep.
That you remember to this day?
Yep.
I've only had one. I've had one. It was so bizarre. It was maybe it was shortly after I read about the Chapman incident or something, but I was in this ramshackle cabin in the middle of a prairie, but the prairie didn't have grass. It has, can I pay you for this, Leon? The prairie didn't have grass. It had these yellow flowers, acres and acres of yellow flowers. And all of a sudden, I became very apprehensive in this old cabin. And I went to look out one of the windows, well, where a window used to be. Now it's just an opening. I looked out, and about 300 feet away or so, I could see this creature, dark, covered in fur, looking more like Neanderthal than you think of a Sasquatch, because it had the protruding face, but very muscular. And I was scared to hell. I said, I can't move. It'll see me, and it'll come this way. But it kept walking and kept walking right on by the cabin and right down over the hill to a river that was a distance away. And I remember that vividly till this day. I don't know what it was telling me. Speak to the flowers, or I don't know what the heck it was. But most of my thoughts are old-fashioned. That's why they come out as a Neanderthal. But it has always fascinated me what that dream meant and what it was.
How old are you?
That's a good question. I have no idea.
What's your suspicion of how old you were when you had the dream?
Oh, that was about 20 years ago. So I guess I was in my late 40s.
And when did you start looking for Sasquatches?
Not in any meaningful way till about 2003.
Which is 20 years ago.
Yeah. So this is a pre-investigatory research stage of getting interested and involved in the subject. That's why I mentioned at the beginning, it sounds like the Chapman experience. where the Sasquatch came across the railway tracks in Ruby Creek and scared the kids that were playing outside. And the mother took the kids and ran down the railway tracks or to the river where the father was working with another crew. And this thing came into their house. And when the father and that went back, it had ramshackled the house, stole their salmon, busted open kegs of flour and what have you. So I began to feel like maybe this is a reflection on that story. Why that story? I don't know. Maybe subconsciously that story terrified me more than any other report that I had read up until that point.
Well, the flowers could represent the curiosity of it as well. Because you're frozen, that's what you said in the dream. I can't move if I move. So
yes,
that's
because I was afraid it would see me. I was afraid it would notice my motion and come to the cabin.
Right. So flowers can represent either offspring or ideas of offspring, new curiosity of a topic, you could say. And were they dandelions, or what kind of flowers were they?
No, they were petals. They had petals on them. No specific kind of flower. I say the closest would probably be a tulip or a rose type flower with those kinds of petals.
Buttercups?
Bigger.
Okay.
Yes, buttercups are very close, yes, but they were bigger. Say they were about, I don't know, about the bottom of a Coke bottle or a Coke can size. So they were big. Yeah.
One of the skills I've developed over time is to try to have a trigger that will help me to realize that I am dreaming, and not to wake up, but to become conscious within the dream, and even lucidly take control of elements of the dream.
See, I agree with that because I've always dreamed in color, and I've always dreamed in my dreams, no matter what it's about, no matter how terrifying it is, I always know, as you say, you got the lever. You can just say before you open that closet door where the monster is, no, don't open that closet door. Let's go down the hall this way instead. And that's where my dream would go.
Okay. You'll get a kick out of this. This is my last Bigfoot dream. This was about a year and a half ago now. And I'm driving down a long, straight stretch of road in the Gifford-Pinchot area, I think. And about a quarter mile, it's dusk. And about a quarter mile ahead of the car, I see something walk across the road on two legs. And this has become a trigger for me to become lucid in my dreams, and it worked here. So I'm driving the car, I see this, and okay, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to grab a camera, and I'm going to look up the hill where this thing crossed the road and see what's up there. And as I'm pulling up and slowing down the car right at the place where it crossed the road, I look up the hill, and there's about 5 of them in the trees up there. There's not just the one. And then I start to think about whether or not stopping and getting out with a camera is a really good idea. And then I wake up.
Still leaving you in a quandary. To be continued next month sometime.
Yeah.
Get out of the car or not.
So Steve, just maybe taking you on a different direction here. One of the things that I like about your channel, which is different than most other channels out there, is your essays. And I think, and I, in the pre-show I had mentioned that, I don't always agree with your conclusions, but you stated in effect that you have a defendable position. So if I was to attack the argument, I would expect a logical rebuttal. And I like that when somebody's doing an essay. Could you just sort of explain to the audience the process of how you come up with the idea for your essay, how you do the research for it, and then how you finally present it? Because I think what you do there is unique and important.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's use the dreams one. There were a number of people, there are several accounts I've heard of where people have dreams after an encounter. That's kind of understandable because it was probably a life-changing experience on some level, if nothing else than in realizing that maybe they're not actually the top of the food chain. And there were two individuals in particular who were having difficulty with dreams and nightmares following their encounter, but for whom I had a lot of details, moment by moment details about how their encounter went, in part thanks to Leon interviewing them. And I was realizing in my thinking that there was nothing particularly aggressive about the actions of the creatures in either of these encounters. Yet these encounters were tremendously stressful to the individuals involved, and they had difficulty sleeping, they had nightmares, they'd wake up in cold sweats. And so I dug back into what I'd learned about teaching dreams, and went into a few psychology sites that talk about dreams and why we have intense dreams, and that's the brain building neural pathways and things like that. You dream a lot when you're a kid. You might not dream as vividly or as often as you grow up because your brain is not building so many new pathways all the time. But I arrange these, I think about what I want to say, I outline it, I usually find myself rearranging it 2 or 3 times before I start recording it. And so that's why I like that better than just jumping on a camera and doing a live recording with a completely ad hoc thing, because I find that I'm able to arrange things in a more logical way once I get all the content down, and then no, I want to say this before I say that, and no, I want to add something here before I say this other thing. And
I also noticed, Steve,
that flows better.
Yeah, I also noticed, because you and I connected up fairly early when you got back onto the scene, I think, or fairly early. What I also noticed is in your essays, it's about your experience of what you walked into, trying to provide some kind of rational narration to what may be happening to people, or what help kind of guide people internally of what's happening in regards to their experiences. And so some of the ones that you did, which was, when you talked about Dunning-Kruger effect and mind games, and also about, there's that one brilliant one when you mentioned about Everest. You want to share that a little bit? A little metaphor.
The path to enlightenment is littered with the shattered remains of cherished beliefs and the remains of those who could not leave them behind.
Yeah.
And my illustration for that is Mount Everest, because a lot of people don't necessarily know that along the path from the highest camp to the summit, there are the remains of about 300 climbers who have died that couldn't afford to be recovered, and their bodies are lying there frozen along the side of the trail, usually moved just a little bit off the trail so you don't actually have to step over them. And it's something that's very sobering to a lot of people when they make that summit attempt. And some of them made it to the summit, but didn't make it back. And it's just a very serious, very sobering way to discuss the basic idea of your cherished ideas are things that might be holding you back and preventing you from getting to the goal that you have. In the case of those people, the goal of summiting Mount Everest and coming home to brag about it.
And interesting with that is that some of those bodies have now become landmarks that other mountaineers use to discuss different trails.
Yes. Navigation decision points.
I think maybe some people, not some, many people They don't want to give up the old safe and secure. One of the best books I ever read in my life was J.D. Jakes. J.D. Jakes. He's a bishop, and he wrote a book called Reinventing Oneself. And instead of clinging on to your past beliefs and wondering why you keep doing the same thing and it never works, you reinvent yourself. You go back to the basic core and say, what is it you need? And you're not going to get it in the usual manner. I remember in my 50s, it was hard to get a job when you hit your 50s. Nobody wants to hire a 50-year-old. And I would keep going looking for the same jobs that I looked for when I was 25 years old or 35 years old. I read J.D. Jakes' book and said, well, you know, I hate to admit it, but this guy got something. So what I did, I stopped looking for those same jobs that I always had. I went to school, I took courses, and went for jobs in areas that I never thought I would look for jobs. And it became very successful doing it that way. I became a new person. Hence, I was able to get into a market where it kept me in employment for 20 years because I gave up the old idea of what I should be doing instead of what I could be doing. So maybe it applies the same way to this too.
Well, how would that describe me there, Jerry? Because I never change.
You're indescribable, my friend. You are indescribable.
But I think what Jerry's talking about does have some real parallels, because I did something similar at the age of 49. After being with a company for 30 years, I decided to leave, and for various reasons. But there was a lot of fear in making that decision, and a lot of second guessing, and right up till the minute I walked out the door for the last time, there was so much turmoil going on inside that I didn't know if it was the right decision. You know, on hindsight, it was. And I think anything we do, whether it's in research, where it's a personal belief, to make a change like that, does require courage, and it does require a lot of self-evaluation.
Yes.
Well, yeah, and I think too, it's kind of one of the problems that we found online is the ideas of Sasquatch become very cherished. And then once you realize the ideas actually aren't really accomplishing where you would like to go as somebody who's searching for a Sasquatch, you have to wrestle with that. And then not only that, you have to, in a way, not that you're betraying other people, but they will kind of, you feel in a way that they're going to sense that you're betraying them because you no longer can believe what they believed before. Thus, if I stay here, I become anemic and I will die, or I will be fooling myself, and I'm aware I will be fooling myself. So I must move forward. And I think that analogy that Steve says there, every time I hear it, well, especially in that one essay where you actually really kind of stretch that idea out a bit. Yeah, it's not just the topic of Sasquatch, it's about anything in your life.
Absolutely. And I'm willing to bet that in the people I'm seeing on the screen right here, all of you spend at least some time, at least a couple times throughout the year, and probably a lot more, just being introspective, looking at where things are, what you want to do, and how you might get to someplace you want to be that you can't get to right now. A friend of mine who does that too, and frankly, everyone I know who's not stuck in some sort of circular belief system, circular argument belief system, does a lot of introspection. But a friend of mine was talking to his brother once, and he asked his brother, you know, when you sit back and you look at where you are in life and you reconsider decisions you've made along the way and try to figure out what you want to do to change things so that things can be better for you. His brother says, nope, don't do that.
Must be nice.
I don't know. His brother died about 6 months later, and his brother was living at home with mom and dad until he was 47 and died of a heart attack.
Wow.
People aren't going to adapt and change because people hate to adapt and change. I've got no problem believing that something paranormal took place at the same time there was a Sasquatch sighting. I have a hard time believing that each was related to the other. But I mean, you know, I'm willing to give paranormal its due. Not so much the woo aspect, but I mean, ghosts and other disturbances. I'm willing to give it its due and say, yes, in their own place, I believe these things happen. I believe in ghosts. I believe, you know, I think animals have it over us in their unification with the universe around us. I think animals have it way over us. Our dogs and cats have more of an understanding about what's going on in the world than we do, and they have it on an instinctive level. I've seen.
I think they may just have less of a concern.
Well, exactly. That's it. They have
don't
less.
overthink
They don't
everything.
just give a damn. They just don't give a damn. I'm living my life every day, you know, and I'm not going to worry about the big plan of the universe because I'm living it, you know. And people, what are people? People are only the universe made manifest to explain itself. That's it. We're here to tell the universe what it is. That's why the universe created us. Outside of that, no other purpose.
Yeah, growing and changing takes risk, and risk is scary. Like each of you have said who've discussed those changes. One of the things about being a consulting engineer is I'll have a gig for 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, and often those gigs extend for several years because clients find out that I have a lot of really useful knowledge. I can help them in getting product working and in training their staff and bringing their people up to speed. At the same time, sooner or later, those gigs are going to end, and then I need to find another client somewhere.
That's called portable skills, something that I teach people all the time.
But those in-between times can be pretty scary, like 18 months during a global pandemic.
That's the price you pay for being self-reliant.
Well, yeah.
Tell me, Steve, in looking back at some of your essays you've done in the past, have you ever looked back and found out more things and thought maybe my conclusion was premature, or do you still basically stand by them?
I think I pretty much stand by everything that I've put out so far.
Mm-hmm.
There are about 5 that I have in the pipe that I'm kind of working on, and the evidence one I had in mind actually for a few months, and I just didn't have the time to sit down and record it.
That's not the last one you did, though, right?
Evidence is pretty much the last one I did. I would have to.
Well, you talk about evidence
with work and with my clients' concerns.
Right.
Hey, Steve, on your website, you have mission 1, mission 2, and mission 3. Do you think we're getting anywhere with it?
So what I set out to do, at least in concept, was to find 1 or 2 people who were calling themselves Bigfoot researchers, who had a research area they were willing to share,
Mm-hmm.
and who were interested in trying to understand what's actually going on there. Even though they have pretty well rooted in their heads that what they have going on is Bigfoot.
Mm.
And I found one of those, and I spent a lot of 2020 going down to that research area independently of anyone else, usually going down on like a Tuesday or a Wednesday night. What I was discovering was that around Thursday and into Friday, people who are going to go camping on the weekend start to come into the area. And so on Tuesday and Wednesday night and on Monday night, usually aren't that many people, even in areas that are easily accessed.
Mm-hmm.
I also did some experiments. They told me there were things that they did regularly in their camp when they're trying to do their Bigfoot research. And I spent some of the time doing just things that people would do if they were just out there camping and not having any concern about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, anything going on, just paying attention in the camp. Nothing really happened. On the nights that I did all of that, but I also did what they did, which is around dusk, I'd do 3 whoops into the darkening forest. On most of the nights that I did that, I could hear things moving around the camp that I didn't normally hear on the other nights, that I didn't notice. Did I just notice them? I don't think so after the first couple times, because I really started trying to pay attention to that. But I couldn't see anything on thermal, so whatever it was far enough back into the brush that I wasn't able to get a good signature on the thermal. I don't think it was people, because people would have probably had to have been using night vision as dark as it got up there. And I have cameras where I could see if someone was using night vision out in the woods. But I did do experiments to see how well my thermal imager would work and how much information I could get out of it. For example, I'd park the car next to some fairly thick brush on the road where there was a game trail. I'd go back into the game trail, and then I'd come back towards the car with the thermal imager and see how long it took before I started seeing a good signature from that hot engine of that car running for an hour and a half driving down to the research area, to get an idea of what sort of a view I'd really have to have, and just an understanding of how the equipment works and how well it works and where it doesn't work. And that's another thing that I don't see a lot of people really trying to do, is experiment with their imaging equipment, whether it's thermal or night vision or anything else, and get to know how their cameras work and how to use it.
I think a lot of people, they have that concept. If you buy the equipment, they will come, the Sasquatch. I will never use the equipment. I'll never test the equipment. I'll never get to know my equipment. I won't learn about other ways of using it. Like the idea when you say you put your audios out, especially at nighttime, so you can get a triangulation of the direction of where the sound's coming from through the audios that you have. And people just don't seem to think very deeply a lot of times that are online looking for Sasquatches, and nor do they share good deep insights regarding how to investigate stuff looking for Sasquatch. So,
oh, it's all arcane secrets. If I share too much, someone else might discover it first.
Yes, heaven forbid.
Well, yeah, I'd rather have someone not open their mouth and spew a lot of stuff that they don't have any backing for in the way of evidence. I always thought, if you come across something really interesting, hey, if you don't think you're going to be able to convince anybody with just the facts of the matter, of your evidence, keep it to yourself. It's better to keep it to yourself than put it out there and have people not take you seriously because you were poorly prepared or whatever. So, I can understand why some people don't reveal everything they know. They think, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. And when I release my information, I'm going to have the background, I'm going to have the proof and corroborating evidence and everything to go with it. But that's just me,
Yeah. If it's just attention you want, there are dozens of channels out there that just tell Sasquatch stories. They tell stories and encounter stories, and they tell research stories, but their use of the word research is
pretty flimsy.
Rather liberal.
Liberal, yes, that's a good word for it.
Liberal. That's a polite word for it. Thomas, did you ever get that flare going? The camera?
No, I'm still I got to admit, this winter I haven't looked into too much. We need the control board, and we need a certain cable, and finding them in Canada is almost impossible, and crossing the border now is next to impossible. Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't help when the company that manufactures these things don't want to bother talking to their customers.
Yeah.
It doesn't help either. Yeah. It's an expensive proposition. That's $700 just for the keyboard to operate that camera.
I know.
So, yeah. But, and what we're all about, I think, Steve, you said it in mission 2, and that's to promote and explain scientific ways of thinking, to make observations and avoid explanations in the field, to separate beliefs from observations and facts. And keep your mind open, absorb the information that comes to you. Don't be in a hurry to make a decision about it. Look at it later on and see if it makes any sense to you, but just don't discard anything out of hand that comes across your path, because it doesn't match up with your perceived idea of what is evidence of Sasquatch or Bigfoot. Boy, that was a long way of saying,
A fairly short way to say it is to focus on the who, what, where, when, and leave why and how for later.
I was going to say why and how, yeah.
Because why and how require conclusions, and to convey why or how to another person requires a shared level of understanding so that you both know what you're talking about.
Yes. Yeah, and I think definitions are not very readily defined when talking to people online. They think they know what you're talking about. They have no idea what you're talking about. So foundationally, you've got history of, like, again, with just looking at tracks and how many people just look at stuff and they post their videos. I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, you guys, honestly, just spend 1 year sniffing out tracks. You'll be able to recognize that these are definitely not anything to do with Sasquatch. So, but I don't know. I wish I'm happy things are shifting a little bit online. We got a long way to go yet, or else we're going to just keep walking in circles the way we've been doing if we don't start thinking out of the box. And I think one of the things I appreciate about Steve, which I've told him a couple of times, when I've walked into the madness or had a week of madness online, and I deal with madness at work, I sometimes it's nice just to fall asleep to his soothing narration of sanity, logical thinking, to keep my neural net pathway from wanting to go break into shattering a million pieces. So,
you mean his tendency to stick to the facts and not deviate from the facts?
Yeah, the short thing that I thought he was going to say there a second ago, Thomas, as Thomas would say, just stick to the facts, but know what the facts are that you're looking at regards to interpreting evidence instead of projecting onto the evidence an idea. So,
well, another thing I've said is we all know that what we believe is true.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah, that's how wars get started.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. I don't think you should have told him that his essays put you to sleep, Leon. Oh, did I say that out loud? I did.
I've listened to him like 10 times. Like I listened to one, I think 5 times in a row, just because I could absorb how his thought process is. So my neural net pathway gets tuned into that kind of frequency of when I'm analyzing things. And that's what we're missing. We have very sloppy, lazy thinking. Heaven forbid you have to look at something and go back into an area 10 times, which you should, because every time you go there, it'll be a different eye. You'll have a different eyes, and your subconscious has a chance to process your first event. So instead of going back there, and there's been times when, and you guys have had this happen, when you've been in areas where it just gives you the willies. You have no idea why it gives you in the willies. And then other times you go back to the same area, well, the willies aren't there at all. But other areas,
well, it was Bigfoot, obviously.
Yeah, well, it could be. It might be zapping you or mind speaking you or something like that. But there's other areas that I walk into that I have here. There's 3 specifically. One specifically in my head I'm thinking of that every time I go in there, I just get freaked right out. Never seen anything. Never seen any tracks.
Let's go there this summer.
What's that?
Cool. Let's go there this summer.
Yeah, well, that's what you have to do, right? Like, and I don't know, that's the curious part about it. I'm who is it?
For me, it's the northern slope of Mount Adams.
Is that right?
That's a weird area. It just has a strange feel to it.
Yeah, I don't know what it is too. It's like you're being watched. You know, you hear that all the time with people and that. And
well, Leon, whenever you're in the bush, you are always
well,
being watched.
yeah, but I mean, I'm not going to be terrified of being watched by a squirrel or a rabbit unless it's one of the Monty Python ones, of course, from the Holy Grail. But that's a little
Squirrels
different.
can be pretty scary at night.
Oh yeah,
they can make big noise.
So,
you know, I love the ideas you might put forward yourself, Steve, that you know, you're not going to have a long conversation with an idiot or something like that. But I mean, by the same token, it's I feel that you shouldn't do people's work for them either. If they have a question about something, tell them to do the same thing you had to do. Go look it up. Go find it. If it's not,
I agree with that very much. Teach them to fish, not give them a fish.
Absolutely. If it's that important to them, they'll go and dig up the information on their own. They just won't sit there and say, "Oh, why do you say that?"
Yeah.
Well, because I've learned over time that is the truth. That's why I say that. And that's something very much missing in Sasquatch world or Bigfoot world still. It's the premise of why this book was and all of it was created, was to inform the newcomers, the people who fall into the pit traps and rabbit holes and what you have out there, and just give them some pointers in how to avoid it. I'm not going to do your homework for you, but I will give you pointers on how to make it a lot easier to accomplish, you know. And that's what this is all about. This the Book Watch Club, West Coast Sasquatch, everything. It's all about the newcomer or the newbie or the not just young, but of any age. You're never that old that you can't learn or look at something differently. And that's where we came from, and that's where we're going. And we try to avoid the occult of the personality and all the rest of the mind games that are out there. We like to deal with logic and a degree of passion and just telling it like it is, reality.
And I think the other thing that we want to do is, if we do as a group, let's face it, we're all a little older in the tooth, and it can be said that our generation of researchers have failed. I mean, there's no and the original Four Horsemen, that they've brought it forward, but I mean, we've all failed, because Sasquatch, Bigfoot, we don't know anything more about it. We don't even know if it exists. And I think part of what we're trying to do is give the next generation some tools to take what we did, discard the stuff that was just garbage, discard the stuff that was just tribal knowledge, for want of a better word. Go to the scientific method, improve what we did, don't do the same mistakes we did. And, maybe 20, 30 years, they'll be teaching the next generation how to improve. But right now, we don't want them coming in, learning the garbage and doing the old garbage in, garbage out system.
Well, to some extent, there's a lot of value in making some of those mistakes yourself, because as I've described in one of my essays, I've been doing, for example, I've been doing avionics, safety electronics for the cockpit of commercial airplanes for 40 years. And I can't just teleport that knowledge into your brain and make you an expert in that field. To do that sort of thing, you have to do a lot of learning to build the right foundations, to build the framework so that we could even communicate meaningfully talking about software and avionics.
Yep.
But as far as Bigfoot and things like that go, there's a lot of value in experimenting, but in learning how to figure out when something is working or not working. and not just assuming. For example, you buy a thermal imager and it, you read the manual and it tells you a bit about its characteristics and limitations. And well, you just assume that, a device works exactly like what it says in the manual. And the manual usually presents you with ideals. And that's why there's a lot of value in going out and experimenting with the equipment you have, because it doesn't always work in the field quite the same way they say it does in the book or the YouTube video telling you how to use it.
And that was my point exactly, because we've been doing basically the same thing with some variation, but basically the same thing for decades, and it hasn't really progressed the field at all. And if we keep doing the same thing over and over, we should expect the same results.
Let me ask a question. Have you been looking for Bigfoot?
No, I look for Sasquatch.
Sasquatch.
Okay. Have you been
It's an
looking for
inside joke
Sasquatch?
about the Canadian versus US.
Well, actually, I tend to use those terms differently with better discipline myself. For me, Sasquatch is the flesh and blood creature that lives out in the woods. Bigfoot is the spooky woo, mind-speaky psychic thing that stepped off a UFO into the woods and was dropped off by aliens. Bigfoot's everything else.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, Bigfoot is the Bigfoot world, Bigfoot community. Sasquatch is the creature itself, so you can divide
But
them.
my question is, you've been looking for Sasquatch.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
What I started doing when I started getting into this again a couple of years ago was, okay, I'm going to figure out if there really does seem to be something out there that I can't figure out what it is and I can't really explain very easily. And I'm going to figure out what's actually out there.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's going to be Sasquatch and maybe not. And so far it's not. But I do have a couple of mysteries that I want to keep following up on and pulling on those threads.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is that we've got nothing to lose in this game. There ain't one of us here that would lose sleep tomorrow or cry in their pillow if it was suddenly pronounced that Sasquatch never existed. It has been an error or a hoax from the very beginning. It never happened. Forget it, folks. None of us here would lose any sleep over that.
I would have to throw away half of my T-shirts.
Yeah, but what left the handprint on the fender of my car?
Yeah, that's the question, Steve.
I'm
That's what I was
stuck with that one.
Exactly. But it wasn't Sasquatch, because Sasquatch doesn't exist. We've already proved that.
That was Dogman that did it.
It was Dogman.
There you go.
God.
No, I agree, Steve. I mean, and sometimes it's funny what can happen. I use a story where I was up by Pink Mountain, which is just 148 miles up the Alaska Highway from Dawson Creek.
Pink Mountain or Pig Mountain?
Pink.
Okay.
As in the color. And you can look it up on Google Maps. It's a little town. Anyways, I was
No,
up
you
there.
were just giving me a Douglas Adams moment there.
And I had this sound, which I'd never, and I've been hunting my whole life, and it sounded primate. And I looked at I'd never heard it before, and I did the whole search of the normal suspects. I started off with, different types of owls in the area, different animals. And then I said, okay, none of those sounds matched. Then I went outside and said, okay, well, these are other animals whose range aren't supposed to be here, but they can be close. So maybe they've come up in range. And I looked hard for a good year, and then off and on for the next little while. And I could never get anything that sounded close to it. And then I play a game called YouTube Roulette, where I'll just follow different YouTube videos and I'll just click on different ones randomly just to see where I go. And I got one, and my computer crashed. I don't have the link anymore. But it was called something like 10 Sounds You Never Knew a Deer Made, or something like that. And And it started off with, with Dick and, some other fallow deer, things like that. And then it came out with a sound from a white-tailed deer that matched, and this was, like I said, about 5 years later, that matched exactly that sound I'd heard. Now, I grew up mule deer hunting, black-tailed deer hunting, and moose hunting. I know in Pink Mountain they do have a whitetail population up there. And I would never in my life have guessed that sound came out of a white-tailed deer. So that's part of what, when you're doing the research, is sometimes you're lucky. Like I just stumbled upon it. But when everyone says to me, "Oh, I know every sound a coyote makes," or "I know every sound a deer makes," they're full of excrement.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I never knew deer growled.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
myself and Thomas have been witnesses to that when it comes to coyotes. Let's not even go there. Yeah,
Hail sounds, yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah, well, Brent and I were listening to that about a year ago, and it was very much the same calls as the Chehalis calls.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah. Location call. And neither myself nor Thomas heard of it before. I tracked it down at the Calgary Zoo in Alberta. They have a website that has the sounds of all the animals that they have in the zoo. And I went down, coyote, yip, 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 coyote, yip, 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 coyote, yip, 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 coyote location call. What the hell is this? Click the link, and there it was, the Chehalis sounds.
And the funny thing is, the Vancouver Zoo couldn't find it.
No,
Calgary
that's
Zoo
right.
did. Yeah.
So like,
Well, the databases have all the sounds that they have. They don't have all the sounds that the animals can make.
Yeah.
yeah,
I've said this in other podcasts. You'd be amazed. A cougar, a mountain lion, quite often doesn't sound anything like what you saw growing up on those Walt Disney nature films, and it just astounds people. They just can't accept it. And well, unless you saw what did it, it's just a noise. Yeah.
That's a reason to be skeptical when you play that sound into one of those audio databases that will identify what animal you heard in the woods, and it can't identify it. That doesn't mean it's unknown. It doesn't mean it's Sasquatch. It just means that particular program's database doesn't have that call.
I think to paraphrase something Steve once said, it's like back then I didn't know anything. Now I'm sure I didn't know anything. I still don't know anything. And that's the truth. That's the truth. We can sit here and talk all night, but we're only talking hypothetical and what have you. We really know nothing. We're still in the embryonic stages.
Oh, they don't want to hear that.
No, we're still trying to answer question 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Like I say to Thomas, forget looking for the smoking gun. We can't even prove there was a gun to start with.
Yeah.
But it's fun. It beats going to the casino every night, It keeps you out of trouble.
Can cost as much.
People say do something different. Well, as far as I'm concerned, the only thing different, and I have been doing it, but is looking for what science has always demanded: a body or piece of body for sufficient skeletal remains. So maybe instead of going and interviewing witnesses all the time and investigating sighting report incidents, we should just start looking for bodies.
Yeah, that is kind of the old rules, though. For most of the last 2 decades, actually most new species identification is done with photo and DNA.
Absolutely. And I've said this before too, it's always possible, and it wouldn't surprise me one bit if the physical remains or skeletal remains of the Sasquatch are ever laid out for the world to see. It's not going to be found by someone like me who came across them in the bush. It's going to be some anthropology student that came across them in some dust-covered museum box or drawer somewhere.
Yeah, and it's going to be Thomas who? That's the same thing with John Green, who?
Mhm.
You know?
I'm really interested in, over the next 10, 15 years, 20 years, what they do with environmental DNA. I
Mhm.
mean, when you look back 20 years ago, the thought of well, we were doing the genome project, but the thought of using a database such as ancestry.com, where you could plunk your swab in there and all of a sudden find a long lost cousin or whatever. 20 years ago, that was absolutely science fiction.
Yep.
Now today, they're starting with environmental DNA. Where are we going to be 20 years from now with that?
Tricorders.
Yeah, it's very
This,
possible,
yeah,
Bill. Very possible, Bill, that the answer may come about with what you said a while ago. It may be proven, or more importantly, disproven by everyday zoology and anthropology in a roundabout way that they weren't even looking for the Sasquatch in the first place.
Yeah, it would just run its course
wildlife
naturally.
studies, things like that.
well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
when you look at, they're using the term citizen scientist now, which I really don't like because it's trying to give credibility where often it's not deserved. But when you look at true scientists out there, the biologists and things like that, you take, say, say somebody from the University of Washington that's doing a study on the migratory spawning of salmon, for argument's sake. They're out there collecting their samples. Well, they're not. They may be looking at salmon, but that doesn't mean that their eyes are closed to every other animal in there. And they're scientists. So maybe someday when we get down to environmental DNAs, or they're going in taking water samples to see the genetic diversity of the species in there, those are the people that might find it. Or it might be a ornithologist out there listening for bird calls or something else that that has the skills to determine it. So I think the future may not only be with amateur researchers like us, but with professional researchers using new equipment that has broader ranges and advancements that may stumble upon answers that we didn't even have the questions for yet.
Yeah, you've still got to have enough stuff in the sample for it to show up.
No, exactly, but as again,
It's refining.
and I like the term, in industry we call it future proofing. Stop looking for the answers today, try to figure out how you can find out your answers tomorrow. And I think part of what we got to do is that.
Well, if you look at a study like the Loch Ness study, a serious study trying to assess what is in Loch Ness, and any result is possible, and they collect all their samples, they do the eDNA analysis, they find evidence of all the creatures that they know live in the lake, plus a few that they didn't. They find evidence of all the creatures that live in the drainage basins that drain into the lake. And they don't find the Loch Ness monster. But in all of that they found, realize also that 25% of the DNA they were able to reproduce in that study was thrown out because basically the fragments were so degraded and so small they couldn't be meaningfully matched to any other fragments, because what you need to do with eDNA is you're getting fragments of DNA and you're trying to connect those fragments together into longer and longer segments until you actually have whole genes and even whole genomes. And it takes a lot of computing power. The chemistry is relatively simple. It just takes a lot of computing power. But the chemistry keeps getting better and better too.
No, exactly. And I mean, you go back to the 80s when they did, were taking samples, they were down to blood type or maybe some cultural identifiers. Now they've progressed so far beyond that. And that's the thing with eDNA, even if they don't identify, and I've said it before, let's say, 20 years from now, 10 years from now, they do eDNA studies in 5 or 6 different areas that are separated by hundreds of miles for argument's sake. And in each one, they find similar DNA that is unknown DNA. You know, that then is a powerful argument that there's something out there that people just haven't identified. And then if you do some comparison to other genomes, you could come up with, okay, maybe hominid or whatever. But regardless, just getting better with the technologies are going to help us a lot.
Well, here's what you're likely to expect. In the range of sequences that are on file right now, the thing that is least like us, the last time I looked, is still the octopus, which shares about 85% of our DNA. So you are 85% like an octopus, and that's the most different thing on the planet. You're about 2% different from a chimpanzee. And the chimps are about the closest primate to us. If you're looking for something that has hands like this and that has feet like ours, it's probably going to land closer than 2% to where we are. You're going to know it's a primate. You're going to know pretty closely how it's related to us based on the phylogenetic tree that we have. You don't need to have a specimen that you took the DNA from to know what that DNA has come from. You do need the specimen or the picture. Excuse me. You do need that picture to tell you how long ago it was there.
Exactly. And the converse.
We find DNA of Sasquatch, but we don't know if it's 20 days old or 20,000 years old.
And conversely, though, if we do get into these environmental studies and eDNA and they become commonplace and much better than we have today, if we don't find anything, then again, that is evidence for a lack of existence.
Or mass delusion.
Yeah, for right now. Well, I want you to tell me how my delusion left a handprint on the fender of my car. I'm with you.
Oh, I know you're with me. I mean, I'm thinking about when you look at the COVID thing. I mean, how do they tell when it's reached its crest? Well, I've been listening to the news, not fake news, but they check out the sewage.
You'd be quite honest.
Human excrements of the cities. That's how they know that the spike has happened, because it's not prevalent that much in the sewage anymore. So
it's the most honest thing about us.
Yeah, and we're full of shit, but I have a lot of data in that shit. But I think that's the thing is, like Thomas says, and that is we've been sitting back in the 80s, 90s mentality in regards to technology, but technology is almost doubling itself every year in regards to its capacity in a variety of different fields. And if they're out there, it's just a matter of time, and I don't think it's going to be that long of time, maybe 10 years, 20 years. If they're not there, we're going to find out within 10 or 20 years, I think. Because it's not going to be able to hide from the DNA, the environmental DNA capacity.
I'm just thinking 20 years ago, 22 years ago, I said, gee, in another couple of years, 4 or 5 years, we'll have this figured out. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, well, I think that's 78.
I mean, technology, again, the thing about technology, though, that's happening, when you hear about, you need higher sight gives you wider area of vision to see. And when technology is not about the vision, it's about being able to cover a larger area. And if you can do that with environmental DNA, which covers a lot of area that we could possibly cover, and we don't even have to be there for it. We just put the sampler collections kits out there, and then find out what's in that, like the Loch Ness study they did. They're not going to be able to hide. I mean, that's the bottom.
The problem there, as I've kind of recently learned, and it was kind of surprising to me in some ways, but not surprising in others. The big problem there is actually ethics, because when you're doing an eDNA study and you're probably in an area where there has been people. There's at least been one person who collected the sample. And when you're doing the alignment studies, as the DNA strands are being strung together by the computer, and you see things that are identifying as human DNA, you tend to stop following those studies unless you're specifically studying a human population.
Right.
The reason for that is at some point in collecting a whole mitochondrial genome, you're going to come across some fairly significantly individual identifying information within the DNA, and that's an ethical issue for scientists. So if we are looking for a species identification in mitochondrial DNA, what we do know is it's not in the genes that we commonly look at to differentiate, say, people from chimpanzees, from deer, from elk, from bear. It's not in those genes. So as Dr. Meldrum says, it's like an advent calendar, but there's 1,000 windows, and we usually open just 2 windows to see what's there to identify the species. And those 2 windows don't seem to contain the differentiating information.
Yeah, at the present time, yeah, but I think it's getting more sharper.
No, those 2 windows don't and never will. We need to open other windows.
That's what I'm saying. Yes, yes, but yeah.
Bigfoot bingo. Wow.
Bigfoot bingo.
Cool. Yeah, but the further what you were saying about technology, yeah, I mean, I think that might be the saving grace in this case, because, I mean, I recall back in the 90s, they were saying that technology, every 18 months, what comes off the shelves in Tokyo and comes across the water to us in the way of TVs and laptops and any kind of electronics, shelf life 18 months. The thing you got for Christmas last December, it's already obsolete now. The second model is already out. They just don't advertise it. They're waiting to, move it onto the market at the right time. So with technology doubling itself like that every 18 months, you can only hope that there's going to be a cheery outlook when it comes to DNA sampling in the future.
Well, they weren't even thinking we were going to be this far with DNA compared to where we are when this back in the 80s and stuff. That's going to take forever for us to do it. And then, boy, once that started to fold over and multiply itself by foldings, it's just went like crazy. So,
what do you say to that, Thomas?
Well, I've been hearing technology dumb, and we should get an answer. I've been hearing that forever.
Oh, you Nancy negative Nancy.
I've been hearing that.
I've been pushing it along for all this time.
I've been hearing it forever.
Sour grapes.
No, it's not sour grapes. It's the reality. We're still trying to answer question
one. I'm still not going to hold my breath for it.
Yeah.
Well, I
hope that happens, but wow, it hasn't. I mean, I remember going on a television show back in the early 80s, and I said, well, I think we'll have an answer in maybe 10, 15 years. I'm guessing, of course. I couldn't imagine we'd still be looking in 2022.
Job security, man. Yeah. Job security.
And I think the other thing that we've often missed is the interdisciplinary approach. I mean, how often have you heard when somebody's doing research, you hear from somebody else, well, you're not on, a boots on the ground guy. Well, you don't need to be. I mean, there's people out there that, like Leon, good in the woods, can, take a print, figure out, how the mechanism of energy happened or motion happened in that footprint, figure out what it is. But there's also people that can take a audio recording and have a background in audio. They may not be able to go out there. They may, physically can't get out there, but they can do the research into cleaning up audio. You have other people that can do it with video or photography. And I think sometimes the guys that actually, boots on the ground, they get arrogant in that that's the only thing that matters. And I think we really need to look at to be successful, it has to be multidisciplinary, and the only way we're going to get forward, because you can't be an expert in absolutely everything. What did they say? Francis Bacon was the last guy that knew everything there was to know in Western science. Well, he's been dead a long time.
Yeah. Well, I had a guy on Bigfoot forums come on to me saying, I don't know if you get out in the woods very often, but I get out 5 times a week. And I replied to him, yeah, I don't care if you go out 5 times a day. That doesn't tell me you're any good at what you're doing, So it's kind of irrelevant how often you're getting out there. It's what you do when you do go out there. And I guess that's why he has an extra star by his name or something. I don't know.
Well, Steve, thanks for showing up tonight.
Sure. I had one question, just for the fun of it. I've spoken to Leon quite a bit, Jerry at least once before, Thomas a couple times before. Bill, I've never met you before. You've had a chance to watch my essays, and you mentioned it. Where do we have our differences?
Oh, just in some small things, in some definitions. Nothing major, just slightly different outlook on things. If we really want to discuss it, I have to go watch them again in a deeper detail. But no, there's nothing major. I think some of your definitions with evidence don't quite line up with mine. But if we were to have a debate, I'm sure, like I said, you have nice definable or defendable positions. So I don't think you're a nut bar or way out.
I'm not digging for differences. I'm trying to understand contrasts where you bring value and where we may bring different value.
Yeah.
We
you
do that at another time. If you want me to dig deep in a couple of your videos and discuss them, that would be absolutely fine with me.
Yes, and come back here and do it.
Well, I would actually, as I said, like we're now well into this program, and I think it's gone by really quickly. And I would hope, Steve, that you'd be open to coming back and chatting with us again, because I think all of us agree on the value of what you're doing.
Oh, totally.
Intelligent conversation, common sense, and a healthy dose of skepticism goes a long way.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's why we love you, Steve.
Like I said, there's no cult of personalities around here. We're all pretty well on the same page with anything, but we do have our disagreements at the same time.
But we
got our researcher, we got our mental health expert, we got our resident skeptic, and I'm just whatever I am. And yeah, man, it's been a pleasure to have you here tonight, Steve. I was really looking forward to this, and it did not fail. It was an excellent night. And you have to come back again.
There that hasn't visited Steve's YouTube channel, I urge you to visit it. His essays are well worth listening to, not just to put you to sleep like Leon does, but to
dig.
That's why I changed the name back to Bigfoot Okanagan.
Yeah, I was going to mention that.
But again, thank you, Steve. I really enjoyed it, and I do highly recommend your channel.
Yeah, and I'll put links on the info section of these podcasts and the YouTube channel podcast as well. And yeah, it's been a real hoot, guys. I never noticed he changed it back. Damn. And we'll do it again. Hey, please, Steve, come back soon, man. It's been a very enlightening, entertaining hour and a half. And yeah, it's a pleasure to finally get a chance to talk to you, my friend, if I can call you that. And the rest of you guys, you know. Until the next time, folks, I hope you had a good time with tonight's show. Some surprises, a lot of insight, and a lot of fun at the same time, which is the way it should be. After all, hey, if it's not fun, why the heck are we doing it, right?
Yep.
You know, so we're Chronicles coming up in a couple of weeks, and Thomas is also doing a part 2 on that one as well that you'll be interested in noting. And that's it for tonight, guys. You know, keep searching. And thank you for dropping by tonight. Okay, dear listener, that about wraps it up for now. My name is Jerry Matthews. You can reach me at yellowcoyote@talus.net. Thank you for your interest, and until the next time, keep searching.